welcome back to another episode of our podcast, where we delve into the journeys of legal professionals who have pursued their education abroad. Today, we are joined by an inspiring guest, Mr. Dighe. He is an international human rights lawyer with a wealth of experience in international human rights law, international humanitarian law, and public policy. He holds an LLM in European and International Human Rights from Leiden University and a BA LLB from Rajiv Gandhi National University of Law, Patiala. With a passion for humanitarian work, he has contributed to significant projects through organizations like Professors Without Borders and Intersex Asia. Today, he will share his experience working across different legal systems, his insights into human rights advocacy, and his advice for those aspiring to work in the international legal space. Looking forward to this podcast. Hello and welcome to Brief Encounters. It's an honor having you on here. Beginning with our first question, this is something that we ask all our guests. Was pursuing law always a part of your plan, or did your interest in the field develop gradually? Can you walk us through how your legal journey started?
I was not always interested in law. Law was something that I happened to do. So by grade, I think 11th or 12th, I think I was contemplating between doing BA or taking the SAT to do something in international relations, because that was kind of the end goal that I was looking for, was to do something in international relations or any ancillary field similar to international relations. But I think in the middle of my 11th grade, I realized that law sounds like a better option to do that, because the reason that I wanted to do international relations in the first place had to do something with human rights. And I thought that the law was like the perfect way to do that. So it was sort of something that I decided to do in the middle of my other plans, I guess.
Right. So you achieved excellent grades during your undergrad studies at RGNUL. How important do you think academic performance is specifically when applying for like a master's program, and how do you think it impacted your journey?
I think I would not be an authority to answer a question on excellent grades, because that was never, I mean, it may sound rich coming from a person who's already done their LLM at the European Institute, but I never bothered about grades in general. So the only reason why it may look like I have good grades in my undergrad is because I used to like doing projects, the assignments that we had in RGNUL, and that sort of got me the good grades that I got. So I used to get like average marks in like my written exams, because I used to actually, I don't know, have fun with my exams. It sounds ridiculous, but that is what I used to do rather than writing the best possible answer that would get me the best possible marks. I used to have fun with the questions and write what I wanted to write instead of what would have ordinarily gotten me the best marks, I guess. So these marks eventually do help. I'm not going to be delusional and say that marks do not help in like your LLM applications, but they are just a part of it. It's the complete personality that they look for in your LLM applications, at least from my perspective.
Wow, so that's look at innovative way of looking at exams. So, how did your time at RGNUL shape your career interests? Were you fairly clear on what field of law you wanted to pursue, and did you choose your internships accordingly?
I think from the time I was allotted RGNUL, I began looking at its prospectus, and I came across one of its human rights centers. It's the Center for Advanced Study in Human Rights Law, or as we called it, CASIER. And from the first year, the first application that I filled out was for that research center. So I knew somewhere that I wanted to do something in human rights. However, yeah, I think everything panned out all right. But as far as internships are concerned, internships have always been something that I feel like have not gone my way, because the way in which I've stumbled upon my internships was just going through the internet, finding out NGOs that were willing to take people in and stuff. So that is how I think I chanced upon my first internship with Professors Without Borders. I was just scrolling across the web, and then I came across this NGO called Professors Without Borders, which had to do with the right to education and sending professors to countries where the academic quality is not that good. So I directly emailed the CEO and founder, and then she just replied back, and that is how I got my first internship. So internships, I think, took a lot of hard work, took a lot of cold emails, I think, to get those.
Right, and you had mentioned how you were interested in international law and human rights from 11th grade. Is there a reason why you were so inclined towards this particular field?
I think I don't think there was any specific reason for international law, but I think in the second semester at RGNUL, that was one of the other things that I actually liked was that around our second semester, one of the subjects that we were taught was public international law, which I think is fairly early to learn a subject like public international law, which I think ordinarily other colleges may do in like the latter part of their education. But that really got me into thinking more about international standards and how those standards influence domestic systems and stuff. And then I think I applied for that summer school at Leiden in around my second year, I think the beginning of my second year. And that is what cemented my interest in, I think, international law in general, more specifically international human rights law. So that is how I ended up choosing it as my specialization in my fourth year, which I'm again glad that my college had that opportunity to pursue that as a specialization in the first place.
That is amazing. It's necessary that colleges give you the opportunity and the platform to delve into your interests and learn about it more. So it's great that RGNUL did that. So coming from Maharashtra and pursuing your graduation in Punjab, how significant was the cultural shift and how did you adapt to it? Any advice for undergrad students who are entering college now?
I think there was a complete cultural shock. I think more in terms of the nuances in I think the social aspects. So in a place like Mumbai, I think generally, again, this is not a factual statement, but generally people don't concern themselves with aspects like whether it is your socioeconomic background, your religion, your caste, or whatever. People are least bothered. All they're bothered about is reaching on work in time and squishing themselves in local trains is all they're concerned about in a lighter vein. That is what they're concerned about. But the moment I went there, went to Patiala, I think it was a very good experience in terms of being like a frog that is out of its well, that I got to interact with people all over India. So as a person in Mumbai, which is I'm very fortunate to be in a place like Mumbai, which was I think relatively isolated from the socioeconomic ground realities of the other parts of India, which may not be economically that well off. So I interacted with people from all across. So we had batchmates that were from UP, we had a batchmate from Nepal, so it was an amazing experience, and I would encourage people to like step out of their comfort zone, especially like their states, and then go out and then go beyond the preconceived notions that they have about other states, go beyond the stereotypes is what I would suggest.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I mean, I'm sure it must have had its difficulties too. But I think this shift would have also helped you when you went to Leiden University to understand that cultural shift. So it's all about getting ready and adapting to new situations, I think. So, right after you completed your graduation, you pursued your master's at Leiden University. When did you realize that pursuing a master's degree was the right next step for you, and how early did you begin preparing for it?
Again, I don't think this is any standard parameter that one should set for themselves that, okay, by the time you are in your first year or second year, you should have a clear path as to if you're going to do a master's or not. I think the only considerations that should be there is logistical considerations. So the time that you need to give for their English qualification tests and stuff like that, if there are any entrance exams in the first place. So I started actually thinking about it from the time I did my summer school, which was I think around 2019. Is I knew that Leiden was going to be the place that was going to be my top priority, irrespective of better colleges out there or arguably better colleges in the States or in the UK or stuff like that. So I think that first-hand experience really cemented my decision to pursue a master's. And then I think I started working on my applications in terms of thinking about cover letters and stuff like that. By the time I was in I started my fourth year. And then I think I applied as soon as like the ninth semester, which is I think somewhere around November, December, I had submitted my application where people like wait around till like March, April. I mean, it again depends on the cycles that you have. The cycles for UK and US are different, but that is when I applied, which actually helped to apply very, very early.
Right. And considering that you applied right after college, do you think there is a difference between those who wait, get some work experience, and then go for a master's, and those who go right after college? Do you think there's a difference, or do you think any recommendations on what should be preferred?
I think so. I don't want to give a conventional answer like any lawyer and say it just depends, but I think it really does depend. But I think the consensus would be that getting some work experience, if you have like considerable internship experience, then I think it's possible to like take a leap of faith and just go for it right away. But if you don't have absolutely any internships under your belt, then I would suggest that get some work experience. Because I would tell you that the only downside to it, I think there are a couple of downsides, but the primary downside from a like career perspective is the risk of being overqualified but under experienced. So it wouldn't be fair if you like get a degree from outside, get into a good college, try to look for jobs but don't meet their work ex criteria, and then come back to India and do a job which you would have easily gotten with like just a bachelor's degree. That is two steps back. No doubt that it will get you four steps ahead, but nobody feels good while going two steps back. So it depends. The explanation behind it depends is like this, I think.
I think that's a very valid point and very true. I think you need to equalize your experience along with the education that you're obtaining. Understandable. So, Leiden Law School is home to the renowned Grotius, am I pronouncing it right? Center for
I
International
think so.
Okay, Center for International Legal Studies, which is a prestigious hub for international law research. In 2019, you were also selected for a summer school in criminal law. How did that experience influence your academic and personal development?
I think, with all due respect and regard to my college, which gave me the experience I needed to apply for Leiden in the first place, I would say that that summer school was a complete paradigm shift in my idea of quality of education and the things that I felt like I knew, but I did not know. So, for instance, Leiden has this incredible approach of such getting the experts involved in. So, for example, we were taught genocide, the law on genocide by William Shabazz, who is an authority on the law of genocide. We were taught a lecture on crime of aggression by a person who was the permanent representative. I think I don't remember the designation, but he represented the Netherlands in Kampala agreements, which introduced the crime of aggression as a crime in the Rome Statute. So, having these leading experts teach you, there cannot be a better way to do it. And then the last day, which there was a practical exercise. So because this was the summer school on international criminal law, the last day we had an actual exercise where they gave us a practical sort of lecture on understanding how do you conduct a cross examination, a direct examination, what is an opening statement, and that was done by people who were working at the office of the prosecutor at the ICC. So again, there is no better way to learn these things.
My
And that
God.
really opened my eyes to like what lies beyond, I think.
Wow, so it did impact you in a huge way. And learning from the professionals, I think it's the best way of learning any subjects. That's quite amazing for Leiden University as well. So, led to choose international human rights law as your area of specialization? I know that that's something you were inclined to from the very beginning, but why not a general LLM? Why a specific international human rights?
So I was always inclined towards human rights law. So international law, I think I have an affinity towards public international law. So whether it is international humanitarian law, refugee law, or criminal law for that matter, I would have been more than happy to do all of that. But I felt like human rights, international human rights law was sort of, I would not call it an overarching umbrella that covers pretty much everything, but I thought it was the foundation on which all of these law built upon, whether it was in times of war, whether it was specific with crimes and stuff like that. That I think cemented my interest in international human rights law. But as far as programs are concerned, I think I applied to only two colleges. My first application was for Trinity College Dublin, which was the general LLM, and that was because I don't think they had a specific LLM for international human rights law. And I got accepted into their program, but I had to apply to like Leiden as well because that was my original goal. Trinity Dublin was supposed to be a backup option, even though it's a good college in itself. And Leiden had an advanced LLM on international human rights law and an advanced, comparatively a more intensive program compared to like a regular LLM. So the batch size is smaller. So for example, for a regular, if you would have had 120 students, for an advanced LLM, you have around like 36, 40 students is the max. So that group is diverse, the courses are intensive, and there is no other better way than an advanced LLM. So that is how I ended up doing international human rights law.
That's amazing. So, if we could focus on the master's application specifically, what resources or guidance, if you took any external resources, did you find most helpful? Did you reach out to the alumni for advice or did you seek support from the external sources?
I think again it depends is a terrible answer, but I had not worked on applications, but I'd helped my elder brother out with his master's applications when he was applying for STEM course in the US, and then I helped some of his friends also. So I was involved in that process. So I saw how they were writing their SOPs and cover letters and all that stuff. So that really gave me a lot of insight as to what I wanted to write in a cover letter and stuff like that. Because I feel like if anybody is giving you like a template to write a cover letter or an SOP, I think that is a terrible idea because that takes away all originality that you could bring to the table. So I did not take any external resources. As far as alumni are concerned, I think I took some help from a couple of my seniors to just review my SOPs, maybe go through it once, but I don't think that there were more than one or two seniors. Otherwise, I just relied on my family, I think my brother and my mother. So I relied on their help to like proofread it and not give me any substantive input. Because I think an SOP, the crux of an SOP, I think can be boiled down to just one statement, which is, I think, true for me. Again, I don't think it is possible to generalize. But I think the SOP is based on only what you as a student can bring to the table or to that program. How can you add value? How you can add value. The second part is how does the institution or the program that you're applying for add value to you and to your career trajectory and to you as an individual. So answering those two questions, however you want to play with them, would get you a good SOP in my opinion.
That's quite an organic way towards application process. From our former guests and from hearing people, they're very specific about using external sources, getting as many people to help them out just to ensure they get the perfect SOP. But I believe when it comes organically from your heart, I think that gives you the perfect SOP to apply anywhere. And getting accepted into Trinity and Leiden, it's not a joke. It's amazing. It's brilliant. So congratulations on that. So Leiden University is the oldest university in Netherlands, and it has a strong reputation in human rights law. What was it like studying in such a historic institution, and how did the academic environment, other than what you have mentioned already, influence your approach towards human rights law specifically?
I think the academic environment was the best possible environment. I think a large part of that academic environment is the batch. And I have had some of the most amazing batchmates that I could possibly think of. And because the age group for an LLM, Advanced LLM, is very diverse. So the youngest in our class was somewhere around 20, and the oldest must have been in the late 60s. So that age group is really diverse, and the amount of different perspectives and their inputs in class. So people who are from a law background, people who have been solicitors in their own jurisdictions, people who are politicians or whatnot from all corners of the world. So we had everyone from like Iran, Nigeria, Mexico, all over the place. So that really contributed to discussions because if you just take whatever course material there is and then just try to digest it the way it is done in India, I don't think it adds value. But I think people there are more concerned about learning than sort of completing the syllabus on time or learning for their exams. I mean, exams were important. Everyone was concerned about their exams, but that was not the primary objective. So it's not like if the class ended at 1, everyone was uneasy and wanted to get up and leave. They, whatever questions they had, they made it a point to ask. So that kind of really completely changed my perspectives and enhanced them and gave me a lot of direction in what I wanted to do in my thesis or what I wanted to do in life in general. So I think I came out a better person out of that program.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Talking about your thesis, it was titled A Free Speech Based Bottom Up Approach to Ongoing Violations of the ICCPR. This addresses a very complex and a critical issue. What sort of institutional support did you receive in narrowing down this particular topic and researching on it?
So again, a little bit of context for the thesis because it sounds like a bunch of jargon that is crumbled up together. I mean, which it is, but a little bit of context as to the problem that I was trying to solve and the institutional support I received. The problem was basically that there was a lot of enforcement issues with international human rights law, and that is what I've heard from the first day of my law school, and not to mention the 2 years of my specialization at RGNUL. That international law doesn't work, it's a toothless dragon and whatnot. So that is something that I took too hard. It was sort of an academic comeback that international law can work, and it was sort of shifting perspectives on how sort of digital activism as a part of free speech can compel states to comply with international human rights law standards. That was the size of the problem that I don't know, ambitiously or foolishly, whatever you want to call it, wanted to address. I had, I think, amazing support from luminary in international law and international human rights law, Professor Carsten. So he was his inputs on my thesis, the reason I think I passed my thesis in general. But his inputs were very detailed, his feedback was also very detailed, telling me what points I needed to work on, whether it was grammar and whatnot. And for a person of his stature and his ability to sit down, have time for a master student on such a ambitious topic. I was very fortunate and grateful that I could have that. And as far as the other aspects of the program were concerned, I think we had, I think, a month and a half to write the thesis, but the thesis process was broken down into parts. So the first part was, I think, about writing proposals. They had workshops on how do you write a proposal, how do you write your thesis and stuff. So we had thesis workshops that were conducted by our academic coordinator as well, which helped out with the logistic parts of the thesis writing process. But I think mainly the credit is due to my supervisor who helped me navigate this ridiculous topic.
That's amazing. And it sounds like a quite an interesting topic. If I get time, I would definitely love to read it if I could. Because ICCPR is something that we recently had our intra mode, and that was one of our issues in the public international law part. So I found it quite interesting to read and everything. But yeah, great institutional support. That's amazing. So our next question is with these prominent human rights experts and practitioners. Could you share any memorable interactions or insights from the professors who were involved in high-profile human rights cases that you had with them?
I think one of the most amazing classes I've had was from Professor Helen Duffy, who is again a giant in international human rights law, because she runs her own international human rights law practice, which involves practicing across like the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, the African Court, the European Court, and across various jurisdictions. So when she used to give anecdotes from like her cases, which are not like small cases. So for example, her cases that she was working on at the Inter-American Court, for example, a genocide case at the Inter-American Court, or whether it was case in the Guantanamo Bay or stuff like that. Those were amazing. So those classes we cared less about, okay, finishing the syllabus on time. We cared more about getting to learn more from her. At least that was what I was interested in the class. So I got to learn a lot from her as well on her experience of working as a practicing international human rights lawyer.
That sounds amazing. And she sounds like quite an inspiring person. So, Leiden's proximity to The Hague, which is the legal capital of the world, it must have offered unique opportunities. Were you able to interact with international organizations or other legal institutions during your time at Leiden?
Yes, I think I was able to interact with a lot of professionals during our study trips. So our program has annual study trip every year. I think the program schedule may change, the resource persons may change. But we had a trip to Strasbourg in France and Geneva because both deal with like the two aspects of a program. One is European human rights law, the other is international human rights law, and both are arguably the epicenters. So that is why I think there in both the European court, we met with a lot of alumni who were working in the court who had been a part of our program. We met with judges, we met with ambassadors, we met with permanent representatives to the European court. In Geneva, we met with people who are working at the UN High Commission for Human Rights. So it was 2 weeks that completely opened myself to more practical aspects of our program, I think, which was amazing. And Hague was a beautiful city. It's like it is a 15-minute train ride away from Leiden, which takes you to the International Court of Justice. And looking at the building fills you up with hope every time you are disheartened by the developments in the international human rights.
That sounds amazing. So, you had talked about Professors Without Borders and how much it impacted your journey. So, you had the opportunity to work as research fellow with them. Could you tell us more about what your role involved, what Professors Without Borders is about, and share any key insights or memorable experiences from your time there?
I think Professor the Borders was very instrumental in my, I think, professional development in some sense. I had an amazing mentor, Dr. Caroline Warren, who is the CEO and co-founder of Professors of the Borders. And the research internship and the fellowship, both I think I worked on writing papers which focused on the higher education sector in India. And doing that was an incredible experience. To get her input on my papers was also amazing in itself. But the opportunity to explore these critical issues in the accessibility in the higher education sector in India, as well as I think I wrote another paper on the national education policy. I think the opportunity to explore these issues at length is something that I would be very grateful for to that organization, and specifically to Caroline, who was an amazing person to learn from.
So, your profile reflects a distinctive combination of experience in both the humanitarian and the development sector. What are your long-term career goals, if I may ask, and how do you believe your international law background and exposure at Leiden will help you achieve them?
I think that is a huge question in itself, because I don't know what the future holds, but I think I will do whatever and wherever my passion for human rights takes me. That is where the jobs that I have applied for, and I'm still in the middle of looking for jobs. I have applied from everywhere, from whether it is Baghdad to Afghanistan to Middle East, Europe, or whatever. But it is mostly with the intention of doing some groundwork rather than sitting in a fancy office and writing a comment on the situation, which I mean, in all fairness, is helpful. But that is something that I did not want to do personally. I wanted to work on the ground and deal with situations in person rather than commentating on them. So that is, I think, somewhere I'll imagine myself down the line. But I can't say for sure because, again, as I said, I don't know what the future holds for me.
Right. And I think this question is something that I think most people would want to ask. In comparison to when in today's time, everyone would prefer something in the corporate sector, the common 9 to 5 job, which ensures them the so-called stability. Why do you think that you're so inclined or so passionate towards doing groundwork and focusing on the humanitarian and the development sectors? Is there any distinct reason why? Because it's quite different and it's very inspiring as compared to those who are focused on solely monetary benefits that they get from the corporate jobs.
I think it is a disservice to categorize what people want to do or are doing, because I know some batchmen who are stuck with doing corporate work because of their situation in life. So I feel like it's more of, I think that is also somewhere that something that resonates with my passion for human rights is the ability to understand what situation people are in, what level of privilege do they have, how does that affect their accessibility to fundamental human rights, and what is impeding those rights, impeding that access to rights. So I feel like people who may think that earning money is a terrible thing may not, maybe I think somewhere I would say that their intentions may be misplaced in some sense, that it's fine, earn money, it's necessary to live. You can't, I think, live in a rosy world where you feel like social work will solve all the world's problem and be altruistic in that sense. You also have to recognize that there are some practical considerations as well. So I think, for example, even if you're like considering doing a master's, finance is an important consideration, right? You can't just be like, okay, I'll take a loan from the bank and then I think all the goodness in the world will come back to me and repay my loans. I mean, we wish it could work that way, but there are some ground realities that need to be talked about. And that is why I feel like my passion for human rights may be different from someone else's passion for human rights, which may take them to, let's say, the corporate field, do something with business and human rights. So this is my way of doing it, which may not necessarily or ideally be the best way to do it. So yeah, that is what I feel about passions in general and my passion.
That's quite inspiring. Right. So you had mentioned how financial challenges is something that should be kept in mind while pursuing an LLM. It does present significant financial challenges. So, based on your experience, how can one effectively plan and manage their financial challenges specifically?
I don't think I'm the perfect person to ask for financial advice, but I can tell you how I thought about it and how I managed to do it, pull something off. I think the main consideration should be with respect to the employability that that program can give you. So for a degree like human rights law, it depends on like the current affairs that are going on, right? Because the reason why entry level jobs, I think, from my experience at applying for jobs, is difficult is because of funding crunches that a lot of organizations are facing. So that is why I think a lot of entry level jobs are difficult. And if you learn like a good UN language, that obviously helps. But I think the funding problem is the larger part of the issue with the paucity of jobs. But I think jobs are something that you should have in mind, because the moment you complete your degree, right, you may not necessarily have a lot of time to stay back. So Netherlands, for example, gives you 1 year, which they call it open or search year, to look for jobs and stuff. So that entire 1 year of looking for jobs, you also have to consider the fact that you are not going to necessarily earn, because part-time work and all those rules and regulations may be different according to the country. So some countries you may not be allowed to do part-time work, and even if you are allowed to do, a country like the Netherlands, you need to learn Dutch. So you also need to understand those aspects as well. So these are some small or seemingly small points which do matter a lot. So if you are in a relatively, I would say, not a terrible but not a great financial position, you also need to consider how much of a burden this degree could be. So it's always important to consider that the amount of liability that you're taking on yourself. It's fine to take a loan, it's fine to repay it slowly, but you also need to consider, what if you don't get jobs? What if tomorrow some new thing starts in a place like Europe? Because the world right now is very unpredictable, it is very difficult, so you need to have a lot of contingencies in place to make sure that you make the right decision. And even if you don't make the right decision, you have a backup plan. And that financial insecurity can hurt you because it causes a lot of stress to people as well, because the I think the living expenses and the rent that was advertised on the website had on Leiden's website had completely changed by the time I went there. So if the website had said 450 euros per month for rent, by the time I went there, I was paying 675 at university accommodation per month. So I think including groceries, I must be spending somewhere around 1,000 to 1,200 euros per month. That is after I got student housing. So you may want to look at scholarships or stuff like that. And if you don't get those, you may also want to look at unexpected expenses that may pop up, because things are expensive and they are getting more expensive out there. So that amount of certainty is, I think, larger part of your decision to do an LLM should be the financial side, I think.
Makes sense. And there's a lot of volatility that's going on in the world. So I'm sure that affects the costs, and that should be kept in mind when going for a master's program. So now that we're leading to our last few questions, for students who are thinking of specializing in areas like international human rights law, what skills or experiences would you recommend them to focus on to carve out this particular niche?
Again, this is very, 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 very subjective, because I think as far as public international law is concerned, you need to understand some fundamentals which you can, I think, are not that difficult to pick up from any general book that you pick up about basics of public international law. But as far as skills or background knowledge that you require for international law, I don't think any specific area is required. It's as simple as any background for doing law in general. So for law in general, you need to understand interpretation. You need to understand what law is out there, what law takes precedence, and all those things. Because the reason why international law is so amazing and so easy to learn also to some extent is because it is almost at the confluence of civil law, common law, and all other legal systems, right? And that is a very, very novel experience once you start looking at international law. Because I also brought my own prejudices from like the common law system, and then when I was almost confronted by the civil law systems, I was pleasantly surprised, I would say, that this is not the way I used to do it, but it was always fun to learn. So it's always the lesser preconceived notions that you bring to the table are better for international law, but it's always something that you can, I don't know, learn with any basic introduction book. So you don't need any specific skill sets. All you need is hope, I think, in general for international law. Then believe that it is not terrible, because it actually isn't.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So, from your journey, we've understood that deciding to study abroad involves a lot of important choices. Looking back, is there anything that you would have done differently, or what advice would you offer someone who is considering this life-changing decision of pursuing a master's degree, especially right after graduation?
I think everything in hindsight usually seems better for some reason because you have that opportunity and luxury to recalculate everything. But while you're in that decision, it's in that moment to make that decision. I think things may end up being different. And having those regrets is fine, but it should not be something that is as big as, oh, I should not have done an LLM in the first place or a master's in the first place. Which is still fine. It's not something that is completely irreconcilable with your future plan of action, but it should not be that big of a pushback to your career journey. But what I would tell people in general is that it's okay to make mistakes while doing your application. It's okay to not get into colleges because the name of the college doesn't always matter. So, for instance, I was also looking at applying to other colleges like the Geneva Academy and stuff like that. And they may not necessarily be like the place in the world to study, the best place, the place with the best brand name like a Harvard or Oxford or a Cambridge or whatever. And I think even if you don't get into like your dream colleges and you get into in your whatever in your opinion is a substandard college or whatever, I think it's only a difference of the starting line. I'm not saying that choice will not affect you. I'm just saying that there's a different way to think about it. Is that the difference in colleges just gives you a different starting line. It's almost like if you've seen like a relay race in the Olympics, it's like everyone cannot start at like the same starting line. It may seem like you're far off, but eventually you'll catch up. So it's fine to just deal with like what may seem like a substandard college if you are that determined to do a master's degree and settle for it. And then you need to work twice as hard to make up for it, make up for the distance or the apparent distance, I think.
That's great advice. And speaking for myself, that puts me at ease a lot. It's important to understand that everyone has their own journey, but the end destination for most of us is the same. So that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for being here and sharing such valuable insights and experiences. It was an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
The pleasure was mine.
And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you found today's discussion as enlightening as I did. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow and leave us a comment. Thank you.